بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحكيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العليم. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير ونفي إفادة إفادة استفادة، وحتى أتمس بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ودعاء إلى هدى ودلالة على خير اتياب وكلام وطاعة قرب توابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم علمنا مما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا، وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Forgive us for starting behind schedule, but inshallah it will be a beginning of the practice for the month of Ramadan, the aspect of sabr or patience. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of the sabirin. Okay, so inshallah we will be looking at the basis of the fast on Ramadan, and so we're going to divide it into two parts. The first part is going to be based upon the fiqh of Ramadan, more or less the do's and don'ts, so to speak. So the first part is not as or should I say, the first part is more technical, and it's some people they have a hard time. They have a hard time with those things that are a little bit more technical. And then the second half, inshallah, we're going to be looking at more the spiritual aspect of the fast. So what should we be striving for in the fast, and also what can we do to make sure that, inshallah, our fast is actually accepted? Because the basis of the fast is that there's a difference between the fast being valid and the fast being accepted. A fast being valid, that just means that we've completed the outward aspects of the fast such that we would not have to repeat the fast again. However, a fast being accepted, that is from the basis that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken our fast and He has been pleased with our fast. And we understand this distinction from the Messenger of Allah himself, where he mentions to us that there are some people that they fast and the only thing that they get from their fast is hunger and thirst. And so we don't want to be from that category of people, bi'idhnillah. So we will get started, inshallah. And so this is going to be based upon the Shafi'i school of law. As we go along, I may mention difference of opinion from some of the other schools of law, but the basis of this is going to be according to the Shafi'i school of law. So what we're going to be mentioning are these basic aspects. Is that what is the actual ruling of the fast on Ramadan? What are its integrals, its recommended acts, things that permit one not to fast, making up misfast. Muhammad, can you give me my glasses? And then possible payments or fidya and expiations, kaffara.
I've got you a drink.
Thank you. So what is the ruling on the fast of Ramadan? So the ruling on the fast of Ramadan is that, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. That fasting has been prescribed upon you as it's been prescribed upon those before you, in order that you may gain in taqwa. So the ruling of Ramadan is that it's an obligation. But who is it an obligation for? Because the fast on Ramadan is actually not an obligation for everyone. So the big basis of it is that, first and foremost, a person needs to be Muslim. So the aspect of fasting, or any act of worship for that matter, is that it is not considered to be sound, is not considered to be sahih, unless a person actually believes in Allah. And this is based upon what we understand from the Quran, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in many different verses in the Quran, He mentions two particular characteristics of people. He says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا صَالِحًا. Those who believe and then they do righteous good deeds. And so the belief is a condition for their righteous good deeds, meaning that a person, they could do righteous good deeds, but if they don't believe, then it's not necessarily going to benefit them. And so the first obligation is the person be Muslim. So for example, a non-Muslim can fast, but we would say that that would not count towards the obligation of the fast of Ramadan. The next one is that the person have actually reached puberty. And so many of the rulings associated with acts of worship, one of the stipulations is that of puberty. There are a few exceptions. So for example, zakat. Zakat is an exception, according to the Shafi school at least, that a person who does not reach puberty but has the zakatable amount of wealth would still be required by their guardian to pay their zakat on their behalf. However, in the case of Siyam, the case of fasting in the month of Ramadan, then it is only required upon someone that is pubescent. However, to have young children fast is still something that is recommended, especially if they're older children. So, for example, if they are, maybe 11, 12 years old, such that, puberty is more or less right around the corner, then it would be a recommendation for them to fast so that when they do become pubescent, when it does become obligatory upon them, then it's something they're already used to. It's not something that they have to all of a sudden take on, but it's something that they have already had experience with, and so it becomes more or less something natural. The next one is that a person actually be sane, meaning that if a person does not have control of their aql, meaning that if a person has, for example, been born with a mental deficiency such that they would not necessarily be held legally responsible, then they are not required to fast. Or, for example, a person that later on in life may go insane or some aspect of that, then these are people who are not going to be required to fast. And then the last one that is mentioned is the actual ability to fast. And so there are many different categories of people who could fall into this category in terms of people who are not able to fast. We'll discuss some of the details in regards to that, but some of them could be, for example, a person who's elderly, a person that has a chronic sickness, or someone um, uh, who may have an acute sickness. But inshallah, we will talk about some of these things in more detail. So in regards to the actual integrals of the fast, the actual requirements of the fast, they're very simple in terms of what they actually are. The first one is to intend to fast. So when we say intention, we're saying that sometime between Maghrib, the night before the fast day, and before Fajr of the actual fast day, so sometime between Maghrib and Fajr, that we have an intention to fast that following day. Now, the aspect of the intention is that the intention, the locale of it is in the heart. So technically speaking, a person doesn't have to say any actual verbal utterance. However, a person needs to have an acute awareness of what it is that they're doing before Fajr time comes in. So, for example, if a person gets up and makes suhoor and makes sure that they stop eating before Fajr time comes in, that person has an intention. Why are they doing all the things that they're doing? Is because they intend to fast. And so, as long as a person has that acute awareness of what they're doing, then that is more or less going to coincide with the intention. However, if a person wants to say it verbally, according to the Shafi'i school, that is actually something recommended, as it can help assist the heart in reminding it of its intention. And so one of the ways of saying the intention is that if you want to say it in Arabic, for example, you say نويت صوم غد عن هداية فرض شهر رمضان هذه السنة لله تعالى. Or in English, I intend to fast tomorrow as a current performance of the obligation of this year's Ramadan for Allah Most High. However, these are actually formula that the ulama themselves had developed. This is actually not something that we have from the Messenger of Allah, for example. So again, as long as a person has the acute awareness in their heart that they are fasting this day, that is going to count as the intention. Now, the next integral is merely the aspect of The next integral is merely the aspect of abstaining from those things that nullify the fast. And we're going to get into what those things are. And so one of the things that a person can get used to is that in terms of the intention is that what our teacher used to do when we were in Yemen is that after every Maghrib prayer, he would say Niyat as-Sawm, just as a reminder for us. And so that is something a person can do. And this is something that is the intention is something that's going to be required for every day of the fast. So every day of the fast, you make this intention. However, there is an opinion in the Maliki school of law that says that a person can, on the first night of Ramadan, make the intention to fast the entire month. And so the ulama, they recommend doing this as well. Is that they recommend that at the first night of the month of Ramadan, that a person makes the intention to fast the entire month. And this is something that would be considered to be valid according to the Maliki school of law. Now, if a person were to actually forget to make the intention, meaning that they truly did not intend to fast, like for example, they've happened, they for whatever reason they forgot that it was the month of Ramadan, they slept past Fajr, hypothetically, and then they wake up and they're going about their day, and they're about to get something to drink or something like that, and they say, oh wait, I'm supposed to be fasting today. In that type of situation, like if a person truly did forget to make an intention to fast, then that person would need to make that fast up after the month of Ramadan. And so when we talk about the aspect of making up fast, one of the things to note is that when we say that a person needs to make up a fast, they need to make up that fast sometime before the next coming Ramadan. Now, when it comes to supererogatory prayers, meaning that outside of the month of Ramadan, then it is actually permissible to make the intention to fast all the way up until Dhuhr. So, for example, if a person wanted to fast the 6 days of Shawwal, for example, they were going to fast the 6 days of Shawwal, which is a sunnah to fast right after the month of Ramadan, excluding the day of Eid, then they could actually make their intention, as long as they didn't do anything to break their fast, they can actually make their intention all the way up until right before Dhuhr. Now, all the things that would actually break the fast, whether it be eating, drinking, having physical intimacy with one's spouse, and so on and so forth, you are allowed to do these things all the way up until Fajr actually enters. And so once Fajr actually enters, then it is required for you to cease whatever thing that you may be doing that would break the fast. And so if Fajr enters and you intentionally do something further that would break the fast. So say for example, I have food in my mouth, Fajr enters, and I just decide to quickly swallow that food, just to finish it off. That actually breaks the fast. Or if a husband and wife are intimate with one another and Fajr enters, if they don't cease the intimacy immediately, then that would also break the fast. And so you're allowed to do it up until Fajr actually enters, but the more precautionary situation is that you would actually stop a short time before. So the practice of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum is that they used to actually stop eating and stop doing other things that could break the fast about 15 to 20 minutes before Fajr actually came in. And essentially the what is actually is based upon is that they will stop eating and drinking and other things the amount of time that it would take to recite 50 ayats of the Quran. And so you can round that to about 15 to 20 minutes. And so that is actually even better. And in this case, you can engage in other acts of worship to take advantage of that time. Another thing to keep in mind is that entering into the day in a state of janaba does not invalidate the fast. So for example, if a person has a nocturnal emission, they have a wet dream, and Fajr enters, their fast is still valid. Being in a state of major ritual impurity does not invalidate your fast. Now, what are the things that actually break the fast? So, the most obvious one, and the one that we're all, the most used to more or less, is the aspect of eating and drinking. And so, from the standpoint of fiqh, it's not just the aspect of eating and drinking. What it actually is to have a substance reach the body cavity through an open orifice. And so, one of the aspects is that it actually, as it mentioned on the slide, be an actual substance. So again, this excludes traces, as for example, as taste or smell that doesn't actually have a substance. It has to be something that is actually tangible. And then the body cavity, we're talking about one of the actual hollow areas of the human being. So this would be, for example, the stomach, the throat, the head, the inside of the ear, also the hollow areas around the private parts. So these would be considered to be the body cavity. And then through an open orifice, this would be like the mouth, the nose, the ear, the anus, the front private parts, and also, and may Allah keep us all, healthy and safe, but even a artificial orifice. So for example, if a person were to have a catheter that's been inserted into them, for example, if it wasn't, if it was going through, like the side of the body or something of that nature, even if it's an artificial orifice, that as well would be something that would be considered to be an open orifice.
That breaks the fast.
So if a substance actually does enter into the body cavity, so if a person deliberately and willingly allows for something to enter into their body cavity, then that would break the fast and they would have to make that day up. If they do it forgetfully, or they're being forced to do it, or even possibly doing it out of ignorance of its unlawfulness, then the fast is not necessarily nullified. Now, the latter portion, the aspect of ignorance, would be something that is commonly unknown to people. So, for example, not many people necessarily know about the aspect of something entering into the ear breaking the fast. So, for example, if a person were to not know this ruling and they would, and you shouldn't do this anyway, but let's just say that a person did, but like they entered a Q-tip into their ear, then that would be excused for that individual due to their ignorance of that breaking the fast. Now, some of the things that may come up for a person is, for example, if a person has bleeding gums. If a person has bleeding gums, then it becomes an obligation that they rinse their mouth out such that the substance of the blood is removed from the mouth. And so it's not going to be sufficient just to spit, because that blood is going to mix with the saliva, so it's going to be a foreign substance. So you have to rinse out the mouth thoroughly with water. You cannot just allow for yourself to swallow the blood or to swallow your saliva that's been mixed with the blood. However, your saliva in and of itself is not considered to be something that breaks the fast. So if a person just swallows their saliva, there's no issue to that unless it's mixed with something else. And so that's, given the example that we just did before in terms of blood, for example. Now, when it comes to mucus and phlegm, and so we're talking about that which either comes deep from the stomach or that which comes from what would be considered to be the outer portion of the nose, such that a person would have to, more or less suck it back down. If a person has that type of phlegm, so they have something that comes from the lower portions of the throat, and then it comes up. If it comes up to what the ulama could say would be the exiting point of the kha in the Arabic alphabet, such that essentially a person is capable of expelling it, then they must do so. However, if it comes to a situation where it comes up, but it's not at a point where you could actually expel it, then it will be considered to be excused. Now, if a person is rinsing their mouth out, so they're making wudu and then they are rinsing their mouth out, one of the things that they should make sure to do is to do it very lightly with only a small amount of water, and do not gargle with it. Because if you do any of those things, that if you do the opposite, or if you do the things that I said that would break the fast. So for example, if a person does gargle, or if a person uses a lot of water, or if a person does not rinse out their mouth lightly, so they rinse like they're like getting the water all the way to the back of their throat. If a person were to do those things and the water were to accidentally go down their throat, their fast would break. However, if they took all the precautions that I mentioned, so they only used a little bit of water, they kept their head forward so that the water wasn't towards the back of their throat, and they didn't gargle, and however, some way, some water still got down, then that will be excused. And then once you spit the water out, any remaining moisture that is in your mouth is also going to be excused. Now, if you decide to rinse your mouth for something other than ablution, and when we say ablution, this also includes, for example, a sunnah ghusl. So, for example, the ghusl that is made for the Friday prayer, for example. If you rinse your mouth out for something other than ablution, then if water goes down your throat, then the fast is broken. Because the basis would be that rinsing of the mouth is not an actual obligation. There's no, or neither is it a recommendation. And so there is no necessary reason for a person to do that. And as we said before, in terms of ghusl, it's going to be the same thing. If a person is taking a ghusl and water reaches the body cavity some other way, for example, it gets into one's ears, or it gets into one's nose and goes down without them exaggerating, then if it's a recommended or obligatory ghusl, that will also be excused. If it's neither recommended or obligatory in terms of the ghusl, then that would not be excused. Can we just go back two slides? Yeah. Forward one. Yeah. Okay. So we can keep going. Now, in terms of medical uses, so something like Vicks or a similar type of nose tube that has a scent that one inhales in order to open one's air ducts, this would be permissible to use because, again, there's no actual substance. However, if there's something that has a substance, like a person inhales some type of powder, or a person uses, I forget what they're called, but like they use those liquid things that you put in your nose to clear out your sinuses.
Those drops?
If it goes down your throat, meaning that it enters the body cavity, that will break the fast. Additionally, things like nose drops, suppositories, if a person needs to use an inhaler, these are also things that will break the fast. Why? Because these are actual substances. However, if it's a medical emergency, like a person needs to use this, so for example, a person is having an asthma attack or the like, then we're not saying that a person cannot use them. So for example, if a person needs to use their inhaler and they're fasting in the middle of Ramadan, we would say for them, go ahead and use your inhaler. You're not sinful. All we're saying is that if you have to use it for medical purposes, then that would break your fast, and you would just need to make that fast up a day after Ramadan ends. Now, what I will say though, in regards to inhalers is that some of the other schools of law would actually not consider inhaler to be something that breaks the fast. However, according to the Shafi school, inhalers would be something that would break the fast. Now, when it comes to your eyes and ears, technically speaking, there are some differences of opinion. So in the Shafi school, the actual opinion says that things that go into the ear break the fast, whereas things that go into the eyes do not. However, medically, we've more or less come to find that it's kind of like the opposite. That things that go into your eyes can actually reach your body cavity, whereas things that go into your ears do not. And so the best possible way of going about things is actually just to try to avoid both. For example, if you can avoid using eye drops during the day, that would be better so that you avoid the difference of opinion. Now, when it comes to syringes, the ulama, they differ about it in regards to whether or not a syringe is going to break the fast. If it's a syringe that is actually giving you nutrients, so for example, it's like an IV, then definitively that's going to break the fast. However, other things, like for example, a person getting their blood drawn, um, a person using a syringe due to diabetic needs or the like, then there's some difference of opinion in regards to that. And so, if a person's able to use it after Maghrib or to have the uh, the medical procedure done after Maghrib, that would be more precautionary. But there is a difference of opinion outside of, again, those things that are known to give a person actual sustenance. That's why we mentioned the example of like an IV. Now, other things that are permissible to do is that, for example, it is makruh, it is disliked, but permissible to taste food with the edges of the tongue if one is confident that none will reach the body cavity. And so the way that you do that is that once the food is tasted, is that you rinse out your mouth right afterwards. However, the ulama, they mention that this is disliked, this is makruh, so a person should not do it, with only a few exceptions. And like an exception that they give, for example, is if, for example, a person is cooking for a large amount of people, and so they want to test the food just to make sure that there's no there's no extreme in terms of seasoning or the like. Then if they can't find someone that is permissible for them to taste it, such as a young child or a woman who may not be fasting during a certain time of the month, then to taste it with the tip of the tongue would be permissible without necessarily being makruh. But again, it would be better altogether if you were not to do so. In terms of smelling things do not break a person's wudu. However, in the case of incense or oud or the like, it's better not to, because in some of the other schools of law, they do actually consider those things to break the fast. So, for example, in the Maliki school of law, the inhaling of the smoke from incense or bukhor or these type of things would actually break your fast. So it's better not to, in terms of, for example, incense or the like. Smoking, though, itself, meaning a person smoking cigarettes, does actually break the fast. Secondhand smoke that is unintentional does not break the fast. If street dust, flower chaff, or car smoke, any type of thing that um, comes into you unintentionally. So you're standing out in the streets, and you have car smoke or cigarette smoke or any of these type of things. If that unintentionally gets into your body cavity or the like, then that is excused. Yeah, as long as you're not intentionally trying to take in any of those things, then that is going to be excused. Now, according to the Shafi'i school, if a person is fasting, it is not permissible for them to give someone else food or drink if they know that that person is going to eat it during the day, and they would be a person that would be required to fast. and this would include non-Muslims. And so this is a ruling that is more of an issue for those who, for example, have restaurants or things like that that they own, where they may sell to a large amount of non-Muslims. However, there is an opinion in the Hanafi school of law that would still permit it. And so, in that regard, a person could take the Hanafi school position. But if you are in a position where, for example, you're the owner of a restaurant, then if you, for the month of Ramadan, switch your hours such that, you stay open at night and try to market it to the Muslims, we're a halal restaurant, for example, that's open at night, then that would be more precautionary. The next nullifier is deliberately vomiting. So this is only in the case of someone who intentionally causes themselves to vomit. This does not break the fast for someone who gets ill and vomiting overtakes them. So this is only in the case that you intentionally cause yourself to vomit that it would actually break the fast. The next one is intercourse with, and this is essentially penetration. So any type of physical intimacy outside of penetration is not necessarily going to break the fast. However, for example, if a person does kiss their spouse, for example, and they kiss them such that saliva is exchanged, then that could break the fast if they swallowed that saliva. However, um, other aspects of intimacy where nothing actually enters into the body cavity, technically speaking, would not break the physical aspect of the fast, but the ulama would say that it actually breaks the spirit of the fast. That part of the aspect of the fast is to be controlling one's desires. So to engage in aspects of foreplay or the like, even if it doesn't lead to actual intercourse, that would be something disliked. And even within the Shafi school, there are some of the Shafi ulama who did consider that if an individual comes to the point intentionally doing something that causes them to have pre-ejaculatory fluid exit, meaning the fluid that comes at arousal, not ejaculatory fluid, but actual pre-ejaculatory fluid. If they were to allow for themselves to reach that point, some ulama would actually say that that actually does break the fast. So essentially, it's better to avoid physical intimacy during the day with one's spouse. However, technically speaking, the mu'tamid position, the relied upon position in the Shafi school, is that only intimacy, meaning physical intercourse, physical penetration, actually breaks the fast. And we mentioned the related issue that is mentioned here, is that if you were engaged in intercourse before Fajr came in, you would have to immediately stop once Fajr comes in, or else you're going to break the fast. Now, the thing about intercourse is that if a person were to break their fast with intercourse, meaning that they were to have intercourse during the day in the fast on Ramadan and they were not excused, then not only would this person be required to make up the day, but they would also be required to fast 2 consecutive months as expiation. And when we say 2 consecutive months, that means 60 days straight without break. So that if you, for example, were on day 59 and then for whatever reason you cannot fast day 60, you'd have to start all over again from day one. And so it's something to be really mindful of, is that we should not be engaging in sexual intercourse during the day in Ramadan. Now, ejaculation, if it's caused by physical, something physical, then that would break the fast. Now, as for kissing, fondling, if one fears that it will result in ejaculation, it is unlawful to do so. And if you do ejaculate from that, as we mentioned before, it nullifies the fast. And again, as we said before, even if you know that you're not going to come to the point of ejaculation, it's still better to leave off all aspects of foreplay altogether. Now, for women specifically, a woman who is in her postnatal bleeding or menstrual cycle, they are not permitted to fast. And so for them, their act of ibadah changes. So without being in a state of menstruation or postnatal bleeding, their act of ibadah will be to fast. Once they are now on their postnatal bleeding or menstrual cycle, now their act of ibadah, their act of worship is to not fast. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded for them. And so a woman, she would actually be obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and receiving reward for not fasting. The only thing that is going to be recommended for her, though, is that when she does eat or drink, is that she do it in private, meaning that she doesn't necessarily, especially particularly during the day, that she doesn't do it in public, so that people won't necessarily, unfortunately, have a bad opinion and not realize that she may be on her menstrual or her postnatal bleeding cycle. And so, if a woman begins the morning menstruation and then becomes pure during the day, she is not obliged to abstain from nullifiers for the rest of the day, although it is recommended for her to do so. And if she begins the morning in a state of purity and then begins her menstruation, then her fast is nullified for that day, and she would just make up that day. So if a woman begins the day fasting, but then has her postnatal menstrual cycle occur, then she would make up that day and any subsequent days that she misses based upon that menstrual cycle or postnatal bleeding cycle. Now, as you mentioned before, a person that does not have control of their aql, their intellect, is not required to fast. So if a person becomes insane, then their fast is nullified, and even if this is only for a moment. Unconsciousness, this is something different. So if a person is unconscious before dawn and remains unconscious until sunset, that fast is invalid and it will be obligatory for that person to make it up. However, this is different from someone who just sleeps the whole day. Like, so for example, someone who, as it mentions, if a person is conscious at the beginning of the day and later becomes unconscious, or if one is unconscious at the beginning of the day and later regains consciousness during it, even only for a slight moment, then the fast is valid. And as we said before, is that a person that just sleeps all day, his fast is valid, versus the person who's actually unconscious. And the basis of the unconsciousness is that the person does not have the opportunity to make an intention to fast. So the whole basis of it is that, as we mentioned before, the two integrals for the fast of Ramadan are the intention and avoiding the nullifiers. And so these nullifiers, again, they start at the time of true dawn. Now we mention this because sometimes people, they misinterpret or misunderstand the verse of Quran where it talks about the white thread, is that this does not mean that we are able to see the light outside. Is that when true dawn comes in, it's, generally speaking, from our perspective, pitch black, because we have so much light pollution and buildings and houses and things of that nature that keep us from being able to see the true horizon, that by the time that we see the light, Fajr is well in. And so, and this brings us to another situation, is that there is a slight difference of opinion in regards to the timing of Fajr. And essentially it goes based upon degrees that some scholars prefer over others in regards to calculating the angle of the sun. So if a person were to look at a prayer app, for example, in their settings for that prayer app, they'll be able to adjust the prayer timing calculation method. And so in particular for the fast of Ramadan, it's considered to be more precautionary to go based upon the 18-degree prayer setting for Fajr. And that is going to be about 15 to 20 minutes earlier than the default prayer timing for Fajr, which is usually the 15 degree. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Now, the thing is that if a person has normatively been going based upon the 15 degree, there are scholars who consider that that is the accurate timing for Fajr. However, again, it's more precautionary to go based on the 18 degree to avoid the difference of opinion. And as we mentioned before, if there's food or drink in your mouth or Fajr comes in and then Fajr comes in, then you have to immediately spit it out. You cannot um, swallow it. Now, if a person does any of these nullifiers forgetfully, under coercion, or ignorance, as we said before, then the fast is not necessarily invalidated. And so the one of the basis is that in terms of ignorance is that a person is required to seek out those who can inform them, which alhamdulillah, everyone who is here tonight is doing, what the rulings of the fast are so that they can make sure that they have a valid fast in relation to their worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what if you nullify your fast without excuse? Whoever nullifies his fast intentionally, meaning without excuse, they have to make up that day and they need to make a tawbah. And as we mentioned before, if they were to nullify their fast based upon intercourse, not only would they have to make up that day and make a tawbah, but they would also have to fast 60 consecutive days. And the 60 consecutive days, in terms of the Shafi school, is for the man. That the man in this case would need to fast 60 consecutive days without break. Now, if a person is not certain if the sun has set or it's still nighttime, then that person, if they were to do something in that time frame, um, so for example, if they thought that it was still Fajr and they ate, or they thought that Maghrib had entered and they ate, then that person would be required to make up that day. Now, whoever eats or drinks or has intercourse thinking it probable that it's still nighttime, it is subsequently learned that his dawn has entered, his fast is nullified, and he must abstain from nullifiers of the fast for the rest of the day and make up that fast. If he does not come to learn that the dawn had actually entered, his fast remains valid. So again, so this is the aspect of al-yaqeen la yazala bi shak, that certainty is not lifted by doubt. And so if I'm uncertain about something, then it does not affect the validity of my action. So um uh so that's something to keep in mind, but because oftentimes we go based upon timetables, prayer timetables, it's usually even outside of the 15 and 18 degree is usually more precautionary to give a little time before and a little time after. So meaning that if the prior timetable says that Fajr comes in as, for example, 5:20, then I wouldn't recommend eating all the way up until 5:19. That take a few minutes prior, just in case. And if the prayer time says that Maghrib comes in at 5:50, take a few minutes after that just to be sure. Now, the things that a person should strive to do during the month of Ramadan while fasting is that they should strive to have suhoor. So suhoor is the pre-dawn meal. And one of the things to keep in mind is that don't necessarily try to make your suhoor a very heavy meal, because oftentimes heavy meals don't actually uh, benefit you as much for the fast. They can actually make it a little bit more difficult because it'll sometimes make you more sluggish and tired. But try to eat something that's nutritionally dense. Oats are a good a good suhoor or a very nutritional smoothie or something like that, something that's a little bit easier um, for people to make. Um, uh, or even you can take a more prophetic suhoor, which would be dates and water. But to have something for suhoor, because that is considered to be the sunnah, is that to have something that you eat before the fajr time comes in. And with iftar, it's to once you're certain that maghrib is in, then you should hasten to break the fast. Meaning that you shouldn't delay in breaking the fast once you're certain that maghrib has come in. And the sunnah would be to break the fast with dates and water. So an odd number of dates, three or five or seven or something like that, and water. If you cannot break it with dates and water, then you can break it with just water. If you can't break it with water, then do something sweet, like raisins or apples or bananas or something like that. But to break the fast in whatever way possible. Now, throughout the day, outside of the obligations that we have, is that we want to avoid those things that would keep our fast from being accepted. So things like vulgar speech, um, lying, backbiting, all these type of things. These are things that would break the fast. Excuse me, break the spirit of the fast, such that it's more likely that our fast is not going to be accepted. And so if it's a situation, for example, where you're being abused by someone, you shouldn't retort back to them for tit for tat, as they would say, but rather the sunnah is actually to say, and a sa'im, I'm fasting, so as to not lose the spirit of one's fast. It's also encouraged to increase in as many good deeds as possible. Whether this is going to be charity, extra forms of worship, such as praying tahajjud, meaning the nighttime prayer before Fajr, increasing in our sunnah prayers, whether they be the sunnahs associated with the five obligatory prayers or additional sunnahs like Salat al-Duha or Salat Salat al-Awwabin, which is the six rakas that are prayed after Maghrib and the like. Also, in the last 10 days, to engage in ihtikaf, which is for the men to spend those last 10 days with an intention to remain in the masjid. And for a woman, could be that she designates an area in her house to be in and to engage in worship in that particular spot, to increase our good ties, our good family ties with our relatives. And before going out for the Salat al-Isha and Salat al-Tarawih, to take a ghusl, and for the men to adorn themselves with a good itter, whether that be oud or rose or sandalwood or some type of good perfume. These are all sunnahs and all recommended actions to do within the month of Ramadan. And this is something, again, this was a work that was compiled by my teacher, Sheikh Amjad Rashid. And so he deals, he's actually from Philistine, but he's based in Jordan at this, he's based in Jordan. But anyone that's ever been to the Arab world, unfortunately, that, smoking is a very common occurrence. I mean, even in America, there are many Muslims who may smoke, and so this is something that he's just mentioning, this aspect that smoking itself is actually haram. So, like, even if you're smoking after Maghrib, it's still something that is haram. And so, the best that a person can try to do to remove that habit, that it will be the most ideal situation. Now, looking at the aspect of excuses. So we've talked so far up to this point about the aspect of the person that is going to be required to fast and those things related to it. Now we're going to look at the issue of when a person may be excused from fasting. And there's more or less going to be three different categories that we're going to look at with a few nuances. Isha, it doesn't necessarily have to be the 18 degree as well. It's more significant in regards to Fajr. So, in the case of a person who is sick, so sickness, the type that we will say will be cause a person to be excused, essentially you can sum it up by this, is that it's something that an ordinary person would not be able to bear. And so it's a situation where by you fasting, it's going to worsen your sickness. It's going to cause a loss of a limb or a life, or it's going to like leave a permanent mark. Like it's going to be something that the average person cannot bear. And so in that particular case, if a person has a sickness like that, then it will be permissible for them to break their fast and to take care of that particular sickness. Um, this is not going to include like something like, a person has the sniffles, or a person like some people in the first, particularly like in the first couple of days of Ramadan, they may get like a hunger headache or something like that. That would not be necessarily what we be talking about, because these are things that many people will get, and but they're able to more or less push through it. We're talking about, again, essentially something where it is something that normatively a person is not able to bear. And the aspect of it worsening your sickness or increasing your sickness, or the like, this can either be based upon prior experience, or ideally a righteous, or should I say a Muslim physician informing you of that. And the reason why we say Muslim physician is because a Muslim physician, inshallah, would understand the importance of the fast of Ramadan as well as the medical significance. And so they can make a more appropriate decision based upon that. The other person that will be excused is a person that is taking a trip. And when we say that person is taking a trip, meaning that they are traveling approximately 50 miles away from their city limits. So it's not from one's house, but it's from their city limits. So if a person is traveling 50 miles or more from their city limits, then that person would be excused from fasting as long as they left prior to Fajr time coming in. So meaning that if a person is within their city limits, when the time that Fajr comes in, they are required to fast that day. And so if a person is going on a trip and they are going to be traveling for more than 50 miles outside of their city limits, then they will be excused from fasting. However, they don't have to abstain from fasting. That if they're capable of still fasting, then it would actually be considered to be better for them. Then another category is a person, a woman in particular, who is either pregnant or nursing. This A pregnant or nursing woman is not excused from fasting just from the sake of being pregnant or nursing. A pregnant or nursing woman is only excused if she fears harm for herself or for her child. If she fears harm for herself and her child, then she only has to make up the days that she missed. If she fears harm only for the child, then she would have to make up that day that she missed, and she would have to pay a fidya as well. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So if a person missed a fast, whether it be for a excused reason or for a non-excused reason, then they would need to make those fasts up as long as they're capable of doing so. However, these particular individuals are not required to make up any fast. So a child when they reach puberty, so a child does not have to make up all their fast from when they were prepubescent. An insane person, when he gains his sanity, does not have to make up their fast. A non-Muslim, when he accepts Islam, does not have to make up any fast. An elderly person who is unable to fast does not have to make up any fast, because their excuse for not being able to fast is never going to change. Yani you're not going to get any younger, as much as we may wish to. Or someone who has a chronic medical condition. For example, a person that may have a form of diabetes where they're just never going to be able to fast or the like. Now, in these last two categories, the people who are never going to be able to fast, then these individuals are going to do something else instead of fasting. And so we're going to talk about that as well. So, if while fasting a child reaches puberty, a traveler ceases his travel, or a sick person recovers, it is obligatory for them to complete their fast. And so, if a child is already beginning the fast, and then during the middle of that, they fall asleep and have a wet dream, then they would complete the fast for that day. If they are not fasting, it is recommended for them to abstain from the nullifiers for the remainder of the day. Now, this is what we talked about before. So the fidya is for those who are either um, so we'll talk about it. But the fidya is an additional payment outside of the possibility of making up the fast for a fast that may have been missed or the like. So in the Shafi'i school, it is considered to be the equivalent of 275 grams of a staple food. So this would be like grains or wheat or barley or the like. However, it cannot be in its completed form. Like, so for example, a person can't just give like 275 grams of bread. It has to be in its original form. It has to be the actual wheat, the actual barley. However, in our times today, many of the ulama, they more or less take the position from some of the other schools, in particular the Hanafi school, where they say that you can essentially give the monetary equivalent of it. So you would take the monetary equivalent of 275 grams of wheat or barley or the like, and you would give that to a person. Generally speaking, it's going to be a poor Muslim, meaning a Muslim who will be eligible to receive zakat. Or oftentimes, what happens is that masajid or organizations will be collecting fidya, money for fidya and the like, and so you can possibly give it to them if you feel that they are trustworthy. But these are the people who pay a fidya. An elderly person or a chronically ill person. Again, the basic being that this is a person who's never going to be able to fast. So in the case of the person who's never going to be able to fast, then they would pay a fidya for every day of the fast. So instead of fasting the 29 or 30 days of Ramadan, they would pay a fidya for that. And so let's say that the fidya was, $6, then they would pay 6 times 30 or 6 times 29, depending on the month, whether that's going to be $180 or $174. I think I did that math correctly. So that's what they would pay. So again, it would be this 275 grams worth of food for every day. Now, for the person who delays making up their fast until the following Ramadan comes, they would have to pay a fidya for every year that occurs. That, is so say for example, you had Fulan, he needed to make up days of let's say for example you have Fulana. She needed to make up days of fasting for the fast of 2024, for the days that she was on her menstrual cycle. And now it's now the month of Sha'ban and she still hasn't made up those days. And now her menstrual cycle has started again, so she's not going to be able to make up those days before Ramadan starts. So now, not only would she still have to make up those fasts from 2024, but she'd also have to pay a fidya for having not made them up before the next coming Ramadan. And then, as we mentioned before, with the pregnant or nursing woman, that if she only forgoes fasting out of fear for her child alone, then she would also be required to pay a fidya. She's not sinful for it, but the basis of it is that anytime that you do not fast for the sake of someone else, then you would pay a fidya for it. And so because her fear was only for the child's sake, then she would pay a fidya for it. But again, she's not sinful for it. She would just pay a fidya um, for that. Now, we talked about this already, but this is it in a more formal sense, is that the person that has intercourse, again, intercourse is going to be defined as penetration. If they do this during the month of Ramadan, during the day, then not only are they required to make up the day, but they're also required to do a kafara, which is to fast 60 days. Technically speaking, what it actually is that you would either free a slave, which is pretty much non-applicable in our times today in the Western context, or you would fast 60 days. And then if you're not able to do that, then you would feed 60 poor people. And so this is not a multiple choice type of thing. Like you can't just say, oh, well, I don't want to fast 60 days, so I'll just feed 60 poor people. No, you have to go in that order. So for us, it starts with fasting 60 days. If you are actually physically not capable of doing it, like, it's just medically impossible for you to do it, not that you don't want to, but you're just medically incapable of doing it, then that's when you would go to the aspect of feeding 60 poor people. And so essentially, it's just better not to break your fast due to intercourse. Now, again, as we said before, is that this is only an obligation for the husband, not for the wife. However, if a woman did engage in this and she wanted to be extra precautionary, she would also fast the 60 days because, for example, in the Hanafi school, they say that it's for both the husband and the wife. And so she would just be excused during the time that her menstruation came. But according to the Shafi school, it's only for the husband. And again, you would feed 60 people who are zakat eligible, meaning essentially people who are poor or miskeen. And then and from the reliance, it might have just been the miskeen, the one that's short on money. And so this is just a warning from Sheikh Amjad in relation to newlyweds is that don't let your desires get the best of you, essentially. Is that, and this is what part of the reason why the Prophet Muhammad said, when a young man had come to him asking him if he can kiss his wife, the Prophet told him no. And the reason why that was is because the Prophet had feared for him that he wouldn't necessarily be able to control himself if he were to kiss, that kissing would actually lead to even greater situation and possibly ruin his fast. And so this is just a warning for younger people or newlyweds. Don't let your desires take away from your fast in Ramadan. So I know that was like a good amount that we covered in a little more than an hour. Are there any questions? And again, this is just the first half. Is it okay to fast half a day due to medical conditions? So if a person has a medical condition where, again, it fits one of the criterion that we mentioned before, such that if they were to fast, it will cause their condition to get worsen or it will lengthen the amount of time for them to heal, and so on and so forth, and it's something that normatively a person could not bear, then they're not required to fast at all. So if they wanted to fast just a portion of the day, they could, but it's not something that they have to do. Um, I'm trying to understand the timing of fasting. I did it wrong for the 15th of Sha'ban. So the timing of fasting is that the fasting starts at the time of true dawn, which is Fajr time. So essentially, a person has to stop all the things that would break the fast before Fajr time enters. And so we mentioned that the 18-degree calculation of Fajr is more precautionary in that regard. And you can, if you have a phone app, which most people do, you can just go into the settings of that app and adjust it such that the Fajr is calculated by the 18-degree angle instead of the 15-degree angle. And then the ending of the fast does not occur until Maghrib time actually enters. And like we said before, is that the prayer time sheets that we have are not necessarily exact. So what I've actually found is that the Maghrib time in particular can sometimes be as much as 3 minutes early as to when Maghrib actually truly comes in. So, I would actually give a recommendation that whatever your Maghrib prayer time says, maybe give it another 3 minutes before actually breaking the fast. Just because, again, I've found even if you have like multiple prayer time apps on your phone, you'll sometimes see like there might be a minute or two difference between one app versus the other. So I found that giving it like 2 minutes, excuse me, like 3 minutes before actually breaking the fast is more precautionary. So, for example, if I were to look at my three prayer timetables that I have, the one that I'm looking at now is telling me that Maghrib came in at 5:46. The next one that I'm looking at is telling me that Maghrib came in, okay, 5:46. Of course, when I'm trying to do this example, all of them have the same time. But trust me, I've seen it where it hasn't been. Oh, so this one says 5:47. So two said 5:46, one said 5:47. And then my other one that I have, it says 5:45 and 57 seconds. So as you can see, there's slight, variances in between it. And so uh, again, I found that just giving it 3 minutes is just a little bit more precautionary in terms of Maghrib. I tend to eat a very salty diet, which makes me hungry and thirsty during the day. Any advice on what to eat would be welcome. Um, very salty. I mean, just from a health perspective, I would advise, like, if you can, to reduce the amount of salt that you take in. And then leading up to Ramadan, if you can start trying to do that. And the reason why I say that in particular for Ramadan, is because one of the things that sometimes becomes the most difficult aspect of Ramadan is the aspect of thirst. And so if you're having a salty diet, um, it can become a little bit more difficult in relation to the thirst that you might experience. And then I would also recommend that during the night, and this is just for everyone, is that you hydrate yourself very well. Make sure that you're getting in a lot of water. Um, and if you're not lactose intolerant, milk can also be good. Milk is actually very good at hydrating. And then, as some people have placed into the chat, eating more potassium rich foods can also possibly be something that helps, inshallah. How to strengthen my willpower? Um, take things, set yourself realistic goals and give yourself realistic punishments for not completing those goals. So, for example, set yourself a basic goal of what it is that you want to do. And then if you fail to reach that goal, and again, the first base is that make it realistic. Like if I gave the example, like if someone says that, I want to exercise more, I wouldn't say like for them to make a goal of that I'm going to do 100 push-ups a day if they've like never, they haven't done push-ups in like the last 10 years. Like, make something that you can actually achieve that's going to get you towards the goal that you want. and give yourself a legitimate punishment for not completing it. Um, so, like for example, a person can say like, if I don't complete, this goal, then I'm going to have to give $50 away in charity, which over time that can add up, or but something where you're going to feel it, so that like you're not necessarily going to want to have to do it, but it's also going to be something that is reasonable. And then by doing this, you start making yourself accountable, because the other way of strengthening your willpower is actually just to have a teacher, or a good companion who will help you to stay accountable. So if you can have a companion or a teacher that can help you stay accountable, that's also, that something that can help as well, inshallah. Um, do I keep do I keep the 18 degrees after Ramadan? Me personally, yes. But again, there is a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. The 18 degree time is most applicable in terms of the fasting Ramadan, because you don't want to be in a situation where you eat past the actual time of Fajr. So it's most applicable in Ramadan. But do I, generally speaking, keep with the 18 degree even after Ramadan? Yes, but it's kind of nuanced, meaning that I will keep the 18 degree timing after Ramadan, but I more or less just use that from the standpoint of praying to Hajj, or fasting in Ramadan, fasting supererogatory fast, such that again I don't go past that time if I'm trying to do either one, but I actually won't pray the obligatory Fajr prayer until the 15 degree prayer time comes in. And so if you do that, then like you're covered on both ends. Can you please repeat the amount you have to pay someone cannot fast? So it's not a set amount. It's based upon the monetary equivalent of 275 grams of wheat or barley or whatever the staple grain may be. So it's going to fluctuate. I just happen to use $6 as an example. However, in Ramadan, usually you'll see notices that will say like, this is the amount for Fidya, whatever the case may be, because it fluctuates because the price of staple grains fluctuates. But usually it's going to be somewhere anywhere between $6 to $10. And so if a person's never going to be able to fast, then they would just take that $6 or $10 amount, and they would just multiply it by the 29 or 30 days for the month of Ramadan, and they would give that to one of the eligible zakat recipients, in particular the poor, the miskin. Uh, wow, there's a lot of questions. Uh, what is the Maliki opinion on fidya for women, specifically in the case of a couple breaking fast with intercourse? I understand the ruling you mentioned to be based upon the man initiating. Is that a correct understanding? So I'm not 100% sure of the Maliki position. Um, uh, Unfortunately, I do not know the Maliki position in regards to it specifically. The Shafi position is that if a couple were to break the fast um, uh, from intercourse, then only the man will be required to do the kafara, which is going to be either fasting 60 consecutive days, or if he is physically incapable of doing that, then it would be to feed 60 poor people. So that's the Shafi position. However, I did mention that if a woman wanted to be more precautionary, then she would also fast the 60 days, because in the Hanafi school, they consider that the woman would also be obliged to fast. But again, I'm not 100% sure based upon the Maliki school. How do new converts adjust? Um, for new converts, usually what I would say is that if you're capable, because now like we're past the halfway point of the month of Sha'ban, so it's not recommended to fast at this point. But I mentioned this in a class I did like last week or something like that. If a person is able to, for example, like during the remaining week before Ramadan gets here, like for example, if you like just skip lunch, so maybe kind of doing what they talk about like the intermittent fasting, whereas like you'll still drink, but you won't eat as much. That can help kind of getting your body ready for the aspect of not necessarily having the food that it's used to having. And then um, if you're in an area where you have other Muslims around you, trying to be around the Muslims as much as possible, because having that companionship helps, because when other people are going through the same things together, it makes it a little bit easier. And then, just try to kind of make a schedule for yourself to kind of keep yourself busy. So like you're not just staring at the clock all day. Like, because, as the saying goes, like, watch water never boils. And, if you're just staring at the clock all day, that time will go by so slow that, it would almost be torturous. So, trying to see if you can kind of like give yourself a schedule where you have things that you're doing so that, that, before you know it, the time kind of goes by. What advice do you give non-Muslims that used to be Christian but no longer want to be? Um, I mean, you, I wouldn't necessarily say that you should have to necessarily give them advice. Like you could say, like for example, have you ever looked into Islam, or maybe have you ever considered Islam? But your character towards them is probably going to be the greatest form of da'wah that you can do. In my years of working with many new Muslims and even non-Muslims, one of the major reasons that I've seen for people to enter into Islam have to do with their interactions with Muslims. That if they have good interactions with Muslims, that is actually one of the main ways that people actually come into Islam. What are the minimum actions one should perform during Ramadan to still be successful by the end of Ramadan? To try to fulfill as many of the Sunnah actions as possible. And so you should set yourself a minimum. I would say probably the minimum for every Muslim during Ramadan is, of course, to fulfill the obligation, which is to fast during the 29 or 30 days. But then I would say that making it a, a matter of urgency to pray the Salat al-Tarawih, even if it's just going to be in your house, even if it's only going to be 8 rakas, but making it something that you're consistent with praying Salat al-Tarawih, so that it's not a night that goes by except that you're praying Salat al-Tarawih. And then I would say, as well as getting up for the suhoor, is that to at least pray 2 rakas of Salat al-Tahajjud. And then if you can increase beyond that, by all means, um, you know, because all the good that you do in Ramadan is going to be multiplied. So as much as you can maximize, I would do. But I would say that those things that I mentioned are probably an easy thing for many people to be able to keep up in Ramadan. And if a person, only were to be doing those things, then inshallah that would be something good for them. How do I resist the temptations to eat during Ramadan? Last Ramadan was my first, and I tried but failed to fast. Um, Again, trying to be, if you're able to be around other Muslims, that is something that can help. If not, then again, trying to, try to actually schedule out your day so that you're busy doing things, particularly beneficial things, such that it will keep your mind of off of the aspect of being hungry and so on and so forth. And then during the night, taking the necessary steps to give your body its proper nutrients. So that's why I said, making sure that you stay extra hydrated. If you don't have a thermos, buy yourself a nice sized thermos and drink and sip on that throughout the night so that you can stay hydrated. Making sure that you eat very nutritionally rich foods for sahur, and do not overeat. And I can't emphasize this enough. Do not overeat for iftar. Because you're by you fasting, more or less, you'll naturally kind of see your stomach is going to adjust to not having as much food. Um, um, so, take all those things into consideration. Really try to be mindful about your nutrition, inshallah ta'ala. Is it permissible to not fast for a few days if something foreseeable come up? Um, unless a person is actually excused, meaning that a person has um, an actual valid excuse, as we talked about before, then you cannot intend not to fast. Um, if you don't have a valid excuse, then even though it may be a difficulty, then the intention is to fast. So you cannot decide that I'm just going to not fast now, I'll fast, later on. It has to, the only time that you're excused from fasting um, is if you have a valid excuse. Okay. So it looks like that's the last of the fiqh questions. So as I mentioned, this next latter portion, we're going to be looking at the what if I visit my parents and they don't let me pursue Islam? Is it a valid reason? Well, the thing is that even if, for example, a person that's one of the beautiful things about fasting, and I was actually discussing this earlier today, is that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions to us that um, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that fasting is for me and I reward for it. And one of the things that the ulama mentioned about this particular statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the aspect that fasting is for me, is that fasting is one of those things where no one necessarily has to know that I'm fasting. So like if someone is visiting their parents and they don't necessarily want them to know that they become Muslim, then it's possible that you might give an excuse of like why you're not necessarily eating during the day. Oh, I'm not hungry, or um, you know, I'm I'm trying to be a little bit more health conscious about what I eat, or whatever the case may be. You don't necessarily have to say that I'm fasting because I'm Muslim, but it's a situation where a person could possibly be able to still fast without people having to know that they're fasting. Does a person have to wear hijab while fasting? So this is one of the things that the ulama mentioned in regards to the acts of worship, is that fasting is its own act of worship in of itself. So fasting is not contingent on other acts of worship. So like for example, some people they ask like, if I don't pray but I fast, is my fast still valid? Now, the thing is that I'm not telling anyone to do this, and I'm not saying that you should do this, but from the standpoint of the fuqaha, the scholars of Islamic jurisprudence, they would say that if a person fasts during the month of Ramadan, and again, this is in the Shafi school, that if a person fasts in the month of Ramadan, they fulfill all the requirements of the fast, even if they don't pray, their fast is still considered to be valid. Now, should you do that? No. Is it possible that Allah will not accept your fast because you're not praying? Very possible. But from a technical fiqh perspective, it's two separate obligations. And so, so a priority, like for example, if a person is not fulfilling some other aspect of the deen that's considered to be obligation, like for example, a woman wearing the hijab, it doesn't affect the validity of the fast itself. And so the fast will still be valid. No problem. May Allah make it easy for you. Okay. So inshallah, we want to switch from like the technical fiqh aspect of the fast on Ramadan, and we want to go into the aspect of how do we come to this point of trying to make our fast such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts it and we get the maximum benefit out of it. And so Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a beautiful work. I mean, you can arguably say that all of his works are beautiful, but that just might be my bias. Um, but he has a beautiful work that's been translated into English. It's been translated by Muhtar Halin, which is called
Yes.
The Inner Dimensions of Islamic Worship. If you don't have that book, I highly suggest you get that book. And so that is a book where he goes over the spiritual aspects of the acts of worship that we do on a regular basis, which includes fasting. He also has, there's also another translation where it talks about the secrets of fasting, which is a portion from his Ihya Ulumuddin that's also been translated into English. So again, if a person does not have these books, I would highly recommend that they obtain them. Um, and Sister Tahmeen is already giving you a free copy of it via PDF. Uh, so I guess you could say we don't have there's no excuse, so to speak. Um, Being someone that tries to support knowledge, I would still recommend to buy the physical copy, but you can definitely sell yourself of the PDF. But in any case, in this work, Imam Ghazali he talks about the inner dimensions of the fast, and he actually breaks down the fast into three types of people. He says that the first level is the fast of the awam, the ordinary Muslim, and their fast is essentially what we just went over. Is that they make the intention to fast and they avoid those things that actually break the physical fast. So that's the first level. But then he says that there's a higher level than that. And he says that the higher level is that a person fasts such that they fast from those things that break the physical aspect of the fast, but they also fast from those things that are displeasing or disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the second level. The third level is that a person fasts from everything other than Allah. And so we'll talk about what these two actually mean. So the second fast, when Imam Ghazali, and this is the fast that I recommend for all of us, that this is where we should strive to be at bare minimum. Like, so the first level is what's required. That's the obligation. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Kutiba alaykum as-siyam." Fasting has been prescribed upon you. So the first level that Imam Ghazali talks about, that is what we just went over. That is like the base level that we can't go below. Like if we were to go below that, we'd be sinful. So I'm challenging us that we make that not our base level, but we make the second level our base level, meaning that the second level is what we're actually striving for. And that is that we do our best to first learn what it is that is for us and against us in terms of those things that are displeasing or disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when I say displeasing, I don't necessarily just mean the things that we necessarily commonly think about. So like for example, if I say that it's makruh to it's makruh to why can't I think of something easily that's makruh? Like some of the
They
things
eat horses.
my son is studying Hanafi fiqh, and so in Hanafi fiqh it's makruh to eat a horse, yes. But I don't think many of you are going to be eating horse. But it's makruh, for example, to it's makruh. it's makruh to use the siwak. In the Shafi school, it's makruh to use the siwak after the time of zawal, after the time of the sun reaches its highest point in the sky. And so, from the standpoint of what Imam Ghazali is mentioning to us, is that from that standpoint, that I would do my best to not engage in something like that that is considered to be disliked. But what I'm saying is that some of the things that we do that we more or less look at from the standpoint of being permissible, of being mubah, we really we should really start looking at it from like its ultimate spiritual ruling. And like for example, one of the things I would say is that the screen that so many of us are in front of all the time, is that we should really start to take a measure of a few things: how long we're on those screens, and what it is that we're actually allowing ourselves to see on those screens. And thirdly, to see what benefit am I getting from this? Because most of us, the screens that we have, they have our screen time usage that comes up. Like I know on my iPhone, I think like every Sunday I get a message that tells me how much screen time I had. Now, the significant thing about that is that, let's say for example, your screen time comes up and it says that you had, 4 hours a day of screen time. Now we go into the aspect that I said as well, is that, okay, what is it that I'm actually looking at? And what benefit did I get from those 4 hours? Because the other thing that we should start thinking about is, how am I utilizing my time in a beneficial way? Because part of the aspect of, no, or should I say the whole aspect of Ramadan, is that we gain in taqwa. We only gain in taqwa by doing those things that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by fulfilling our obligations and then doing supererogatory works that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves until He comes to love us. And so if I'm filling my time, during my time in Ramadan, looking at YouTube videos or watching television or checking my emails every 5 minutes or whatever the case may be, that is time that I'm never going to be able to get back. And in a blessed month like Ramadan, the last thing that we want to do is have blocks of time that have just gone past with no benefit. That our ideal situation in the month of Ramadan is that we want to take advantage of every second of Ramadan if possible. So this is why we hear the likes of, like, for example, Imam Shafi. Anyone know how many times Imam Shafi would read the Quran in Ramadan? I think some of you have taken some of my class before, so you might know. How many times would Imam Shafi read the Quran in Ramadan? Anyone know?
30. 30.
No one knows?
30.
So Sister Tahmeen is somewhat cheating because she's like indirectly taking like everyone in my class. And yes, my son is saying 30, uh, but my son is actually incorrect. So Imam Shafi'i in the month of Ramadan, he would read the Quran 60 times. Why? Because he would do 2 khatams of the Quran every day. Meaning what? Meaning that he would read the entirety of the Quran twice a day in the month of Ramadan. Now, for some of us, that just kind of seems outlandish. Like, how can anyone do that? But usually what I do in situations where I'm with a gathering of people is that I'll ask them, like, what is something that you love to do? And so for many men, it's usually video games, and for many women, it's usually television. And I'll ask them, like, so for a man, I'll ask them, like, your favorite video game, like, how many hours did you sit playing that? And like I get all types of things. I had one guy tell me, he's like, I just didn't stop. He was like, it was like days on end. I just kept playing. I had one woman tell me that she had like some series that she was really into watching. She's like, I binge watched the whole season. Or she's like, yeah, I binge watched the whole season in like 15 hours or something like that. Now, the thing is that we can actually, do that. And just if I switch it, like how much Quran can you read in 15 hours? How is it possible to read Quran twice a day? It is impossible to read once. It's actually not. My wife actually told me she actually knows a woman who actually does read the entire Quran every day. She does a khatam of Quran every day. And she's a woman that's alive in our times now. I'll put it to you like this. My brother-in-law, he's a hafiz of Quran. He's a person that's memorized the entirety of the Quran. It takes him about 15 minutes to read a juz, which is a 1/30th of the Quran. 15 times 30 is what? My
Fif-
mathematicians, 15 times 30 is what, 450?
Yes, you're correct. It's
So it's
450.
450. So 450 minutes, you divide that by 60. How many hours is that?
Um,
What is that? 7.5 hours?
yeah, like seven.
Yeah, so about 7 hours.
7.6.
So there's 24 hours in a day. So it's only going to take you about 14 hours to read the Quran twice. So it's very possible. So if a person can play a video game for 15 hours, you can definitely read the Quran in 14 hours. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is going to be able to do that, but what I'm saying is that, and I'm not saying that to like, make us feel bad or whatever the case may be, but what I'm saying is that these are people who are striving to maximize their time. And when I say maximize their time, I'm saying that they're trying to maximize their time in terms of what is going to be beneficial for them everlastingly. So yes, for many of us, that's not something feasible. Like to even try to read the Quran once a day would be, for many of us, unfeasible. Unfeasible. I think the most I've ever done was like six adzat in a day or something like that, and that took me all day. But the thing is that during the month of Ramadan, we want to take advantage of every moment because at the end of the day, we don't know if we're going to get this moment again. And so, going back to this category that Imam Ghazali mentions, in terms of avoiding those things that are displeasing or disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we want to make it a situation that we don't hear or see anything that will be displeasing or disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm giving everyone here, I know you didn't necessarily expect to have a challenge or a homework assignment or like some extra tasks added to your Ramadan fast for this year, but unfortunately for you, or inshallah, you might say fortunately for you, you decided to attend. So I'm giving us all this challenge. Is that a part of our fasting? Is that we're going to make the commitment that we're not going to see or hear anything that will be displeasing or disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when I say we don't see or hear, that includes the things that are actually haram. So for example, I remember when I was working in the prison, I used to, like, the inmates would ask me, for example, about television. Is it haram? And I used to say, like, television in and of itself is not haram, but it depends what you're watching. And so like sometimes I'll say, well, I just watched the cooking channel. And I would say like, okay, the cooking channel is not necessarily going to be haram, but for example, when the young lady that's on the show comes and she's dressed, not covering up her what's considered to be Islamically her nakedness, do you lower your gaze? And so when the answer becomes no, then that's also what I'm talking about. Is that there's once one of the scholars in Jordan, rahimahullah ta'ala, if I'm not mistaken, he passed away. But someone had once brought his family a television into his house, and he had not allowed for his family to have a television before, and so he happened to have sons and daughters. So his sons and daughters wanted to keep the television, but he didn't. So what he did was that He told his sons and daughters, he said, okay, he had them both there. He said, look, you can keep the television, but under one condition. And he looked at his daughters. He said, anytime that a non-mahram comes on a television that you're not supposed to look at, you turn it off. And then he looked at his sons and he said, anytime that a non-mahram that comes on a television that you're not supposed to look at, you turn it off. So you can imagine, there wasn't much to be watched, so to speak. And so, again, and this is one of the aspects that Imam Ghazali mentions in his Inner Dimensions of Islamic Worship, the aspect of see no evil, hear no evil, is that we want to try to make our hearts, receptacles for the increase in taqwa. And so, again, that's going to be our additional challenge for the month of Ramadan, to make that our base level. Next, Imam Ghazali, he mentions the aspect of the elite of the elite. We don't have necessarily the time to get into it, but there's a saying that says hasanat abrar sayyat muqarrabin, that the good deeds of the ordinary righteous are the evil deeds of those who are brought nigh, of those who are truly close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in any case, when Imam Ghazali talks about this aspect of fasting from everything other than Allah, what he's talking about is the aspect of the person who is so conscious about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that everything that they do, from the time that they wake up to the time that they go to sleep, they have an intention with Allah behind it. So that, for example, when they go to work, they don't go to work just to get the paycheck, but they go to work with the intention, Ya Allah, I'm fulfilling my obligation so that I do not become a burden upon other people, and that I can provide for my family the way that you've commanded me to. That when they go to sleep, they don't just pop on the pillow because they're tired, but they make the intention, Ya Allah, I'm going to sleep in order to give my body its rights so I can get up and worship you more. When they eat, in terms of breaking their fast with iftar or the like, is that they don't eat for the purpose of the food, but they eat because they have the intention, Ya Allah, I'm eating so that I can give my body its proper rights, so that I can continue to have the energy to worship you. When they interact with people, whether it be their family or their friends or whoever, is that they don't interact with them just because that they're their family or their friends, but they interact with them with the intention that, Ya Allah, I'm fulfilling the haqq, I'm fulfilling the rights that these people have upon me, that you've given me. And so everything that they do, Allah is the ultimate intention behind it. So if a person is at that level, then your homework is to stay at that level. For most of us, and at least the fakir here, I'm still struggling with the second level. So that's my homework. But if you're past that level, and you're on that third level of fasting from everything other than Allah, then that is your homework. But this is how we strive to really benefit from the month of Ramadan, that we try our best, our utmost effort to make it a situation where we don't allow for even a moment to go past, except that we're trying to do something that's beneficial. And at the bare minimum is that we're at least removing the harmful things from us. That's why I would say, if I were to give any true advice, I would say just unplug. Like, I know, like at the Mecca Center, I'm sorry, Sister Tatmina, and anyone else from the Mecca Center board or admin that's listening. Like, I know, like, we're doing the things during Ramadan in terms of like the reminders and things like that. But I mean, if you are in a situation where you can just completely unplug, unplug. Get make Ramadan your intimate time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Find that time to do at least a juice a day. Find that time to read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
I would love to read
find
the Sirah.
find that time to
Okay,
possibly
I'm
take a
doing
class.
that now.
Find the time to possibly take a Islamic class. Like, I was I was actually surprised because I'm, as much as I teach, I still study. So I'm doing a alim program right now, and guess what? We still got class in Ramadan. So, you know, inshallah, my intention is that the only times I'm going to be going online is more or less for that, or like the times that I absolutely have to go online during like at work or something like that. But my intention is that other than that, my electronic devices, they're taking a hiatus during the month of Ramadan. Again, why? Because this is a time where we use Ramadan as a springboard. And I'll end with this, inshallah ta'ala, is that we use Ramadan as a springboard, meaning what? Is that during the month of Ramadan, generally speaking, for many of us, we are going to be able to do more than what we normatively do. Normatively, we do not pray 8 or 20 rakahs after Salat Isha. Normatively, we don't necessarily get up a half hour, 45 minutes before Fajr. Normatively, we do not necessarily, for some of us, necessarily have a khatam, or should I say like, for some people, they don't read a juz of Quran a day, and so on and so forth. And so there are different things that we'll be able to do that we're not necessarily always able to do outside of the month of Ramadan. And so we take that spiritual um, energy that we're going to have in Ramadan, and we try to use that like a springboard is used, that it catapults us forward so that we can try to live off of what can remain of that throughout the rest of the year. So that's by the time the next coming Ramadan comes around, inshallah, Allah will preserve us to then, is that by the time the next coming Ramadan comes around, it might be at that time where we're kind of like, we're running out, so to speak. And now, the next Ramadan comes around, so now we can get another boost, so to speak, an iman boost, if you will. And so, this is my encouragement to all of us, is that, we at least try to be at the second category, and if we can, be at the third category, where everything from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep is for Allah and Allah alone. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a accepted Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit immensely from the time that we wake up to the time that we go to sleep in all capacities in this month of Ramadan. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be of those who He accepts all of our acts of worship and forgives us and places mercy and forgiveness in the hearts of those that we've wronged. And may He give us khair and lut wa afiyah fi deen wa dunya wa akhirah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam husbana wa ni'ma wakil. Jazakallah khair for joining us, and anything that was of benefit is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and any mistakes
Get back here!
were only mine, and so please forgive me for them. Inshallah, we will leave you in Allah's care. And of course, here comes my cat. Inshallah. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Okay,
barakatuh.
let's go with Catty.
No, don't do that yet, because he's probably going to try to stick his nails in me.